Coming to you from the Forge of Freedom studio in the heart of America. A podcast dedicated to preserving freedom and inspiring personal success. Freedom is born and lives through you, the individual, and it dies in the shadows of tyranny. Motivating our listeners to become well-rounded, freedom-minded people with the body of an athlete, the mind of a stoic, and the spirit of a warrior. The tree of liberty lives on through you, the Forge of Freedom. And now here's your host, Alex Ooley.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Ooley, and today I've got a familiar face and a new face. We've got Matthew Duffy back in the studio here to talk about his second book, Dog Training and the 8 Faces of Aggressive Behavior. And we're also joined by Grant Foster, who is Matthew's nephew and also a trainer slash instructor cohort there at Duffy's training facility in Jeffersonville, Indiana. So first of all, welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you for having us.
It's always good to be. We're excited. And Grant is right-hand man family to boot. How about that?
There we go.
Yeah. No, I love it. My family and I, we run a couple of businesses together, and I admire families that can work together because it's not always easy. And being in the business with family, I can relate to that, but I admire people who can do it because it's it's very rewarding if you can do it successfully. So I'm glad to see it, and Grant, glad to have you tag along. At the outset here, before we get into the book, for those of you who haven't listened to the first two podcasts that I did with Matthew about his first book, the 10 Natural Steps to Training the Family Dog, which you can see on the screen there with Matthew and Grant, as well as on the screen here if you're watching the podcast by video, I'd encourage you to go listen to those podcasts first and check out that book, because a lot of what we're talking here today is going to rely on the concepts that we discussed in those podcasts. But before we get into the second book about the 8 Faces of Aggressive Behavior, Grant, would you mind to say just a little bit about who you are, how you got started in dog training, and what you're up to these days?
Yeah. So I started here, was it 2018?
Yes.
7 years now. I've been working here. I've been around this stuff my entire life. I've always admired what Matt does for a living. I never thought I would get into it. Just so happenstance that I did find my way into it. Started off as basically a poop picker-upper, a crate cleaner.
Very necessary, by the way. The dog caretaking is very serious.
Well, and I still clean poop, so I haven't advanced very far.
So do I.
Off just extra work. I was bartending and serving at the time. He took on a bomb detection contract with the DOD. Needed a little bit of help with all the extra work he had. I wasn't working throughout the day. I was working evenings. So I came in and started with that and then fell in love with it immediately. And here we are 7 years later.
Okay, great. Well, I remember we met. You may not remember me, and I don't expect you to, but we met. I had a dog there. Her name was Millie, and I still have Millie today. She was in the board and train program there, and of course, like we talked about in the first 2 episodes with Matthew, most of that was training me, not her. But I think he said something like, "We almost never remember the humans. It's the dogs that we interact with day to day." So you may remember my dog if I showed you.
Oh, I run
what was that, Matthew?
all the time out in public and then look up and have no idea who's walking them, but I don't recognize the dog.
And we do apologize. Yeah. It's shameful we remember the dogs before we...
I don't blame you a bit. But I remember you were relatively new at the time, and I hope you don't mind me chiming in about this, because I remember that things when you started out seemed sort of mechanical. You weren't very fluid at it yet, and then by the time I was done, it seemed like you were a student of the discipline. And by the time I was done, you'd become so much more smooth at it. You'd honed your craft, and that was only 3-4 months had gone by that point. So I wanted to say that here at the outset. I was impressed with the amount of progress that you made back then, because I think you had just started when I was going through the program there at Duffy. So I can be a bit of a testimony that you're very skilled. And by the time I was done with the program, I thought, man, this is somebody I would be willing to to trust with my dog. So I can't imagine how much progress you've made since then, when you made that much progress in a matter of a few months. So.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's a hell of a
Big
compliment
endorsement for it
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, let's get into the book, 8 Faces of Aggressive Behavior. Matthew, I think I'll direct this one at you, just because since you're the one who wrote the book and sort of an introduction. I think you originally wrote this, actually the 10 Natural Steps book and the 8 Faces of Aggressive Behavior book as one book, and you ended up splitting them into 2. Would you mind to say a little bit about that just at the outset?
Yes, it was actually the brainchild of an editor I was working with. And it all makes sense now. I really wasn't on board with that concept at first, because seldom do we work with a dog that doesn't have at least a certain amount of, if you think of this as assertive behavior, drive, aggression in the title was set up more for marketing so that you could find help searching on the media. But really, this book represents dogs with confidence, with drive, that are assertive. And these 10 natural steps tools are the tools, the very tools we use here at the training center to manage, direct, channel those kinds of valuable tools in working dogs. Whether you look at it as aggressive reaction, or a dog taking charge of an environmental situation, those potentials in any dog need to be directed by the handler without quashing those. And that's an important concept, because our job with a herding dog is not to banish, relinquish, extinguish the aggression. It's to channel it. So the aggression is used to a degree in the direction for the duration that the handler decides. So the 10 natural steps tools are the tools we use to manage aggression, drive, or assertive behavior. So to me, the books belong together. But, and I think I told you this in one of the earlier podcasts, the original 10 Natural Steps portion of this material was 2 or 3 times the amount or volume. And the editor said, no, it's not going to fly. This needs to be succinct work where folks are willing to dive into it and make immediate applications and get results. If it's too heady a read, if it's too thick in volume, it's daunting. Folks aren't going to jump into it. So paring this part down, same aspect with this book, the 8 Faces of Aggressive Behavior. They're both by editor's direction set up to get to the point so that you can apply the techniques and get results right away. So that was a challenge in itself. But yes, these 2 were written as one body of work that was then cut in half and each pared down. So one day, I may publish a Beyond 10 Natural Steps, which gets into the material that was extracted from both these books. And it's more of the thought process. Why do these skills work so well controlling this type of canine personality? And what about this canine personality is special? Is it bad special? Is it good special? Getting into more of that detail, that will be coming in its own volume for all 12 people who want to read that. This is set up for the average dog owner so they can jump in to technique and get some success right away. So it does for all of us. It makes it feel now that their time is well spent, that they can pursue further training because they're getting some results.
Well, what I like about the separation, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, but what I like about the separation is that by making the 10 natural steps its own book, that sort of forces people to focus on the fundamentals, to focus on developing those tools first before they skip ahead to addressing aggressive behavior. Because I think there are lots of folks who will might buy the book and skip ahead to the chapter about the particular aggressive behavior that they want to address and haven't built the foundation, haven't built the tools and developed the relationship with their dog, the tango dance that we've talked about, and the team captain, the team leader relationship that they need to develop. Is that part of the reason for the separation as well, or what was the thinking there?
Alex, very perceptive point. I think what you described represents what we battle with, or what Grant and I are challenged with every day working with our clients.
Over and over.
Yes, that it's kind of from the innocent client's viewpoint. Let's cut to the chase. Let's get down to managing aggression. I don't want to spend 3 months, 4 months developing this tango dance relationship with my dog. I don't need, nor do I want the dog necessarily to heel properly. I need him to stop chasing the neighbor's cat. And Grant, and he's going to have his chance to expound on these topics. We want to scream, duh, I got that. We don't want our dog chasing the cat. At the same time, there is no cut to the chase. We've got to establish a relationship, because before you take me seriously, dog, before you view me as the captain of our team, I need to demonstrate I have captain skills. And we work as a team by my direction. Let me prove that over and over and over and over and over again in very benign situations. So when we get to situations that are not so benign, where the dog is charged, and we'll talk about this later in this discussion, aggressive display for most dogs is titillating. It's self-rewarding. It's energizing. They don't think clearly often in this state of mind, and it's a very difficult state to establish captainship, team leadership. Much better when things are calm, the environment's benign. Let me lay down the rules for a relationship, so then when we get to the challenging environment, the challenging situation, I have foundation to launch from. Wonderful point you brought up. Wonderful point. And Grant, how often would you say, even in simple obedience, that we have to, let's say we work with the average client, 6 to 8 1-hour sessions every other week. How many of those sessions you have to remind them about fundamentals?
I think it's probably the number one conversation that I have with clients is, my dog doesn't come to me. Wants to chase the cat, wants to chase squirrels. He's not sitting, he's not downing. And again, it's like if a stranger came in here and started telling me to sit down or stay, or one of my friends started giving me directive, again, without any foundation being built as a team leader. And I love the concept of team leader. It is alpha, but alpha has been kind of toxified by the internet as being a dominating and intimidating figure,
Right.
when in reality it's deference towards the person that has shown you can trust their decisions, right? And it's getting to that point, like you said, in benign situations. If your dog cannot reference toward you or defer to you in the most calm situation, there's no way his brain, in that very titillated state, is ever going to check in with you or defer to you or, ask you what to do next. He's going to launch off of a basis that has no real foundation.
Yeah, perfect. So one thing you mentioned, chasing cats, chasing squirrels. Obviously, that's one of the faces of aggressive behavior that you talk about in the book. But before we get into those different types of aggressive behavior, what do you mean by 8 faces of aggressive behavior? Let's talk about that first.
Again, very pointed, very perceptive question. 8 faces represents, in our world of management, 8 separate triggered reactions. So the aggression is pure and of the same essence in all categories. But if I have a dog, for example, and I like using the assertive, assertive / aggressive
Cocky.
towards, right, predatory animals. Squirrels, rabbits, cats fall into that category. He's not necessarily aggressive or reactive in behavior towards dogs in that regard. You say, well, chasing a cat, isn't that the same as chasing a dog? No, dog on dog aggression is based more on a competitive, think of it as a competitive drive, a competitive need in the dog in training, where the chasing the rabbit or the cat is more of a predatory drive or instinct to hunt and kill. Same thing when we talk about a territorial dog, as compared to a defensive dog. A territorial dog says, my duty is to keep our area clear of danger, especially competition, other dogs. That territorial dog may not be defensive against or towards human visitors to the house or strangers at all. Where a defensive dog says, I feel uncomfortable when I have a living being, especially a human being, within my proximity. I want to back you up, I want to back you off. That isn't necessarily that same urge to keep territory clear, believe it or not. Now, we did link these chapters, link them together, so there is bleed over. Most territorial dogs do have that defensive tendency and vice versa. Not all, though. We have many dogs come in here, and Grant's going to be able to talk about some of these details, that come in with one specific triggered reaction, dog on dog, predatory, defensive, territorial, protest, intolerance. These are all, along with social aggression, for us, categories of what to work on. So if the layperson sees territorial aggression, a dog responding that way, and they see a dog respond in protest, they register as aggression. So how do we, as the layperson, deal with this aggression? Well, we have to ask questions. What triggered the aggression? Because the solution is linked to the trigger, not the reaction in the dog. And so many times when you see general assessments of dog, here's the common description of a dog that really makes us laugh behind the scenes. This dog is a fear biter, a fearful, aggressive dog. Afraid of what? Dogs, rabbits, squirrels? No, people, if the people are within his proximity, because dogs that often are hyper defensive dogs don't have the courage to keep a territory clear. So they're not going to express themselves out in open area like they do in their living room. So we need to know. We need these details, and then when we get these details, we categorize a dog.
Those details are very difficult to get sometimes.
Yes.
You know, a word we hear all the time is protective. You know, my dog ran across the street into the neighbor's yard to bite a 5-year-old because he was protecting me. And I think that's, you know, a defense mechanism of our own to not write our dog off as aggressive. And
Yes.
Aggressive, I think, is written off as negative so often, but think of, you know, some of the biggest moments in history, like World War II. Aggression is what got us through that. So it can't be just all negative. It's not all positive.
Exactly.
It's not all protective. And I think that's the idea of the 8 faces, is understanding that to address that problem. And more often than not, to address the client.
I'd like you to expound on that a little bit, because Matthew, you alluded to this, and Grant, you just mentioned it as well. So I think sometimes people, they generically label their dog as aggressive, and that's just something that we have to stomp out of the dog. But that's not really what we're doing, right? I mean, because that aggression is part of the dog. It's a natural instinct that they have, and we actually appreciate them for their natural instincts in many regards, right? So can you talk about that concept and what we're trying to do with that energy that they have, that drive that they have, that's not really just stomping it out of them?
Very good point. There's few points that I'd like to address quickly here. One, aggression is looked at as shameful, and we don't even have to get into the human realm. How do we assess aggressive human beings? We don't have to get there. Let's talk about Canis familiaris. When we as average dog owners have a dog that displays aggression, it's looked at as shameful. It needs to be hidden, extinguished, quashed. But then you think about it in practical terms. Aggression is the tool or mechanism that a member of the canid group uses to survive. Without aggression, there is no hunt and kill. Without aggression, there is no protecting territory or pack. Without aggression, there is no competition elimination. You see what you're talking about? I'm talking about if you have, in most cases, natural living beings, again, we don't have to talk about humans, the canine in his natural family, say we have born in a litter, 7 pups, all of them are not going to have enough nutrition to survive. Only the pushiest, most assertive, most aggressive is going to survive. So from the get-go, the one that fights for the nipple most is going to be the one that's going to survive. That's aggression. Okay, so now let's move on to the second point. We, as animal husbandry practitioners, through selective breeding, countless generations, selected certain inclinations, types of aggressive reactions. Let's just use predatory. I'll go to herding because it's so innocent to talk about. Herding drive that is managed or we're going to say manipulated, used all over the world. That is an exaggerated predatory drive that we, as caretakers, dog owners, selective breeders, we've taken the example of predatory drive, male or female, and connected to another member of Canis familiaris that have strong predatory drive. Out of that coupling, we pick the puppy that has the most predatory drive. Bred to an outsider has predatory drive. So through the generations, we have exaggerated that very characteristic to be used effectively to manage livestock. To have, when you watch a true herding dog do his work, it is obsessive, compulsive, intense, mindless focus on that predatory task to a point. If this dog lived in the wild, he wouldn't live very long because he's not stealthy. He's not thinking about careful for himself. He's thinking about, I've got this burning urge I can't control, barely control. I've got to exercise my skill. Now, since we have developed in Canis familiaris number of exaggerated aggressive triggers, herding, and unfortunate to say, dog-on-dog aggression, dog fighting competition, yep, police work, military work, guard dogs, even going way back to the largest states of the English kingdoms where they had what were known as banded dogs. They were tethered during the day while commerce carried on. When the gates were closed, those dogs were turned loose to keep the territory free of all living things. You say, my gosh, how do you manage that much aggression? It's through developing this relationship, because those folks that have herding dogs, police dogs, hunting dogs, you don't want the aggression to go away. We've gone through a great deal of trouble to develop that. We want it channeled. We want it contained. We want it at our directives. Now, that means we can use this valuable tool. But for most of us average dog owners, we don't have sheep to herd. We're not going out and hunt wild boar. We're not doing police work. We're definitely not going to dog fight. So you say, what do we do with all this aggression? Well, now that becomes the challenge. That's what Grant specializes in, aggression management. You know what we don't say? Aggression elimination, aggression extinguishment. This is aggressive or hostile, assertive behavior management. We teach people how to convey to the dogs watchdog behavior, say, for example, it's okay as long as you don't take it too far, as long as you can put it in check when I say so. And remember, it's all about following the team leader. That's why channeling, not quashing, is what we do.
So I want to get into these 8 faces here, but as I was reading this book, a quote came to mind that I'd like to share. And it's a quote by Jordan Peterson, and it goes to exactly this point that you're talking about, Matthew. And the quote is, "A harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very, very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control." And I think you can apply that quote to dogs. Just substitute dog for man. A harmless dog is not a good dog. A good dog is a very, very dangerous dog who has that under voluntary control. And I think that gets at the point that you're driving home again and again in this book, is that aggression management is about teaching the dog self-control. So with that in mind, because let's face it, we appreciate lots of dogs for, like you said, Matthew, herding, for protection work, for police work, for all sorts of reasons, because they have that capacity for aggression.
That
we just have to channel it in good ways. Yeah. So with that in mind, Grant, I think I'll direct this to you. When you have a client that comes in to the training facility there at Duffy's, and they tell you they're there because they've got an aggressive dog, what are you looking for when they come through the door, when you meet with them for the first time?
Well, it's like, even without aggressive dogs, every dog that walks in, the assessment starts right away. It's, we take the owner's word with a grain of salt most of the time, because we do have this natural tendency to downplay certain things. We have this natural tendency to want to protect our canine companion, not make it seem as bad as it is. And again, this word protective gets thrown out a lot. He was protecting me, or like you mentioned earlier, fearful. Watching this dog as they walk in the door, you can get a good read on what it truly is. Is he walking in, leading the charge? Is he clearing out the lobby as he walks in there? Is he being drug in by his owner? Is he averted to dogs, people? Is he more attentive towards a squirrel running in the yard? So all these things are already kind of giving us an idea of where we need to start. And it always starts with the 10 natural steps. Again, if my dog is dog aggressive, or I have a client whose dog is dog aggressive, the first thing I do is not bring in a dog, right? I might bring in a dog to assess it, but when we start this development as a team leader, we start with much more benign things. Things that the dog can keep a very clear head during. For instance, food control. I think you guys talked about it in your last podcast. Who leads the dance when we're doing this walking about town? All of this will make the management of aggression so much easier, because again, we do have that deference. And that is the hardest thing to convince the client, is there is no easy route to this. This is not jumping right into the dog pit and teaching your dog to control himself. You have to address this in so many different faucets before you can actually address the actual issue. And it starts with, what's the home life like? I always ask people, what's a 24-hour snapshot in the dog's eyes, which can give you this idea. If the dog is sitting in the backyard for 12 hours a day and he has a yappy neighbor dog, you can see where some of this aggression might have developed. And again, it gives you a good starting point from there.
And one thing you mentioned in the book is that a lot of people think that, I have an aggressive dog, they're a lost cause. They can't be fixed. It's too late. But that's just really not true, right? I mean, just about any dog can be taught this aggression management. It may be more difficult if it's gone on for a long period of time, and they've got that sort of reward mechanism in play, that reward cycle in place. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I don't remember what chapter it is in the 8 Faces book. I feel sure it's 8 Faces. I say to the reader, I start off the chapter, the paragraph, with several dogs' names. They are my personal dogs of past. I say to the reader, I've never met your dog, but I can assure you, those dogs' names I just read off, far more aggressive than any dog you have ever lived with. And those dogs were my personal dogs in police work, in demonstration for professional work. They were my watchdogs, my protectors of home, promoted to be that, selected as that. And I enhanced those skills using the proper tools so that those skills were under my control. And I don't mean rigid control. The dog understands. Here are the rules. I can bark and keep a person outside of the front door until my team captain says that'll do. Now, the dog says, through rote, through training and obedience, I need to step down. Matt will take that from here. And once they're comfortable with that, now I've got a valuable tool. If I don't have that in control and I have to remove the dog from the front door scene, well, I just put my bodyguard away. I just put my watchdog in the garage because I can't control him. So now I don't have a watchdog. As we go through this training process, it's really about enhancing the skills in the way that works for this particular home environment. And if a client comes in with the most aggressive dogs, we've had a number of them, and it seems to run in waves for whatever reason, over this last 6 to 12 months, if they give Grant a chance, he will say, all right, a proven biter, 3-year-old mature dog, 5-year-old experienced biter. All right, we've got a lot of work on our plate we need to take care of. There is no shortcut in dog training, especially when it comes to aggression management. But Grant tells him with confidence, you follow my rules. You allow me to teach you to build this solid relationship in canine manners, formal command responses. I assure you, says Grant, we will get to the point you can manage this natural, not shameful facet of the canine's personality, his makeup. And keeping this in mind too, that as human beings, we are part and parcel of this conundrum because we've created these bold, brash, charge ahead, 4 feet forward. Don't be stealthy like a wolf. Don't be cautious. Don't run. No, you charge into it blind and take action. Wow, not a natural occurrence pretty much in the natural world, we'll say. But that's what we've created. So given the assessments that we do when folks come in, we can assess, all right, in loose degrees, wow, we have severe heavy aggression to deal with, or very benign, very slight aggression to manage. It'll take us this much time, or approximately that much time. And so the dogs that come through run the gamut, or the range, represent the full spectrum of intense, confident aggression back to almost a playful, reactive sort of aggression.
So one comment I'd like to make, and then we'll get into the 8 faces. And for those who, I didn't mention this at the beginning, we're going to split this book into 2 separate episodes. So we're just going to get through chapter 5 of the book. So it's my goal to cover dog against dog aggression, predatory aggression, and defensive aggression. But just I'll go ahead and give away the others here just briefly, so people have a brief introduction to them, because we've alluded to a few of them already. So there's dog against dog aggression, predatory aggression, defensive aggression, territorial aggression, protest aggression, intolerance aggression, possessive aggression, and social aggression. And what I love about this book is that if you just tell me those types of aggression without providing me examples, I have no clue what they mean.
Exactly.
Some of them are self-explanatory, dog-on-dog aggression, that I can sort of intuit what that means. But the others, maybe not so much, and maybe I think some of them are the same. But what I love about this book is that it provides real-world examples about the type of aggression and how it manifests in the real world, and then how to address those, and how to set up real life sort of trials to test your dog and to train your dog. And I think that's what's important. Matthew, you mentioned in the last podcast that this book is sort of your coach at home, and I think that's true with the aggressive behavior book as well. So I just want to say again, I'd encourage people to read the book, but there's no substitute for in-person training, because you're going to show people how to set up training scenarios to train your dog, to teach your dog, and to proof your dog. So with that being said, if you want to make a comment about that, I'd perfectly happy to hear your comments about that. But I'd like to get into the types of aggression as well. So I think maybe we can start with dog against dog aggression. Would one of you mind to just say what that is and how you see it manifest and how to address the dog against dog aggression?
Okay, I'm going to let you run with that, but I want to make a couple comments first. When we alluded to, or I did, and this is important, I think, for all your listeners, the dogs that I list as my personal dogs and their aggressive tendencies being so strong or intimidating to the average dog owner, the important thing I state in that chapter, through 30 or 40 years of owning dogs as my family dogs that were actually police dog trained, not one innocent person has ever been bitten by one of my dogs because I follow the very rules that we set up to a T. I follow the rules that I've set up. And if you're willing to do that, you can have a very powerful canine in your family and still have safe parameters for everybody to operate by. And again, when we think about the harmless human being or the harmless dog not having the value for most of us, and I think Grant will concur, 90% of our clients want at least watchdog potential. They want the dog to alarm if somebody's creeping around their house. There's nothing wrong with saying that, as long as you have control. And the man creeping around your house is the pizza man looking for the right door. So if it is, I can say to my dog, hey, thanks for the alarm. Hush, stand down. I've got to pay for the pizza. And that's really what we're doing. Now, with dog on dog, I'm going to let him run with that.
Yeah, so dog on dog, I think, boils down to one point, and that's typically competition. It's this concept, again, what you were talking about earlier, in the way that we bred these dogs into what they were, but we can't forget where they came from. They are inherently a pack animal, right? So when they see another dog, it's either going to be, is there food around? Are we in my environment? Are we in my territory? Am I with my pack? Do I need to protect this pack? And I think a lot of this dog on dog aggression happens the most when people do these introductions without understanding what a dog is, right? They say, well, he's really friendly with the family dog. This is a dog this dog grew up with. He is very comfortable with. He is part of the pack. And for whatever reason, a lot of people assume because he is friends with the family miniature dachshund that he can now go to a dog park and be let off a leash. And again, it boils down to this competition that without the understanding where they came from, you'll never understand. Your dog is not a terrible being for wanting to get rid of competition. It is so inherent to him that it feels like the right thing to do. To train certain dogs out of dog-on-dog aggression is the same as training a dog not to pee or poop on the floor. There's not a dog in the world that was born knowing not to pee and poop wherever they want. In the wild, that's what they're known to do, is pee and poop when they got to poop. The same as in the wild, when there is competition in my territory, around my resource, next to the threshold to new environment, that's where a lot of that is happening. And that's where, people say my dog is terrible because he tore up the neighbor's dog. And it's not to write off that as good behavior, but understanding that is what his body is telling him to do. The same way, if I saw somebody smack my mother in front of me, I would become an aggressive dog because inherently I need to protect my pet, right? So that dog on dog, it's not an evil dog that wants to go do that. And especially in the case of the pit bull, they get a really bad reputation because of what they were bred to do for hundreds of years, which is truly to sit and fight in a pit.
Again, we'll say an exaggerated dog on dog or competitive drive, selectively bred to reach its peak in expression. And I would say, by far, probably, our most common aggressive behavior we have to manage is dog on dog.
Definitely.
And it fits, though. You think this competitive nature of a dog is the first step to survival. And so you think, well, he's a great hunter, but he's not really much on running off competition. Well, he's not going to have much hunting time then. So this competitive nature is very common among relatively benign dogs that we see found. So this is something we are never without. Every day, all day long, dog on dog aggression we manage.
Yeah, and it's built into the dog's DNA, and it goes to your point, Grant, about potty training a dog. And there's a line in the book I think that says something like, "You can take a dog out of the wild, but you can't take the wild out of the dog," right? But that's something that we're trying to do, is to manage those instincts that are built into the dog's DNA, so that we can live, we can coexist with our canine friend. So if you recognize dog on dog aggression, or a client comes to you with dog on dog aggression, what's the next step?
Typically with dog on dog aggression, again, it's understanding where this issue derives from, right? To turn off a drive as a non-team leader is almost impossible, right? I use the analogy a lot with my clients. If when I was younger, if one of my dad's buddies came in and said, "Hey, you're grounded," I'd say, "Okay, cool, go get my dad and have him come tell me that," right? If my buddy, my friend, tried to ground me, which is a relationship a lot of people have with their dog without realizing it, your dog loves you like a friend, but doesn't necessarily respect you as a team leader, doesn't, and I'm hesitant to use the word submission, because it's not rolling over on your back and on your tail, it's submitting to the data he has collected as you being a good team leader and submitting to your choices, right? So to acquire, we'll beat that point up today, this team leader role is the first step to any kind of aggression, but especially with dog on dog. If I do not see this dog as a threat, you defer to me and you don't go lash out, right? And it's going to be spoke about again and again. This team leader stuff is the starting point for anything, right? It's something as benign as my dog barks in the backyard. He's not going to hush if he doesn't see you as that team leader.
So we don't start off pairing dogs up and working on this drive aggression towards a dog. We say back off. Let's keep dogs at a distance for a while during training. Give us weeks, if we can, to build walk on loose leash, come when I call, greet a visitor in orderly fashion, defer to me when the pizza's on the coffee table. When we get that squared away, then we can say, all right, now these tools, these components, let's take to the next. Here comes competition. He said, I know what to do then. Yep, but we're going to change those rules. Now, like I had you defer to me, respect me. And again, you can think of it, as Grant said, as submissive, but really it's a deference. Defer to me. I'll tell you what the next step is. And when the competition comes in the room, I need you to chill out, hang out, not downstay even. And we probably shouldn't go into too many hair splitters there, because the difference between control and...
We could get into that all day.
All right, so we've been talking about dog against dog aggression, and the importance of that handler deference, that it's not really this submissive relationship. It's the dog deferring to the handler. And we talk about in the 10 natural steps to training the family dog about the manners and the formal commands, but addressing aggressive behavior, aggression management, it's not really a formal command, right? What are the sort of mechanics of addressing that aggressive behavior?
Excellent point. Grant's going to run with that very thing.
Cool. I look at it the same as a manner, but a much more extreme manner. It becomes an expectation that does not require commands, right? Same way if you took your kid out in public, you shouldn't have to tell him, hey, don't go punch that kid in the face. You expect your kid to, kind of have this mindset, but with a dog, it is much more innate. It is much more visceral, so it's a little more difficult to work with. A good example would be this concept of food control, which I think you all talk about in the 10 natural steps. If I spill food on the floor, or I use the analogy a lot with my clients, if you're taking medication and when those happens to hit the floor, the leave it command is usually not going to be there in time. All right, so you teach it as an expectation, meaning unless I pick up this food and give it to you, unless I put it into your food bowl, you should be leaving alone. And in the terms of aggression, I'm never going to tell my dog to go attack another dog. But if you're always relying on commands, you will end up in a dog fight, because you cannot always be paying attention to your dog with the utmost attention. There will be moments that life happens. If you have kids, if you have family running around, your dog cannot rely on you to tell them what to do all the time, which he covers a lot in the 10 natural steps. This deference comes without verbiage, right? This is a big decision that needs to be made, so I need to check in with my team leader and see how he's handling it in order to tell myself how to handle this. So again, it starts with small things, but it's building on top of this relationship over and over and over again, to the point where the dog doesn't feel the need to lunge out. He said, unless my team leader is going to attack that dog, it is not my responsibility to go attack that dog either.
True.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Alex. It's a true canine self-control exercise. And like all of the canine manners, the concept is which we prove day in and day out, you can get, as a handler, legitimate, hands-free, command-free self-control over the dog so that he can operate with a great deal of freedom within these loose parameters of manners. That means there's dogs in the room. You don't have to be contained in a cage. I don't have to hold you back on a leash. You don't have to be on a down stay. You can mill about. Do not demonstrate aggression towards that dog. That's what brings about negative consequence supplied by the handler. But my dog, you get to choose whether you want the negative consequence or not. And he said, over time, I've learned that choosing the negative consequence isn't beneficial to me. So I opt out of the negative consequence, which means I opt out of that dog-on-dog aggression, which means I'm free to be in this room as long as I don't display aggression towards a dog. Exactly. And so therefore, the handler now is free to do other things, knowing his dog can manage his own drive without and we call it drill sergeant approach to management. I don't need heel, sit, stay, down, leave it, drop it, don't do that, bad dog. I don't need any of that. I can even be encouraging my dog. Hey, I think that dog wants to wrestle with you. I hope you're not going to wrestle. He said, no, not me, man. I'm hanging with you. Wow, perfect. Just what I want. So I can go about other things, knowing my dog is going to keep his own natural tendencies in check.
Perfect. So, Grant, you mentioned sort of the comparison with dropping the food on the ground, right? So that's obviously not going to be addressing aggressive behavior, but it's a similar sort of response, right? So when the dog exhibits aggression toward another dog, you're not going to yell at your dog and say, well, whatever. This is the scenario I have in my mind is you see it all the time. People yell at their dog. They'll say the name and then say no, real loud and aggressively. Right. And you don't want to have to do that for the rest of your life. Right. So you and correct me if I'm wrong here, you supply the correction, and it's going to, the level of the correction is going to depend on the drive of the dog. And you try to do it as early as possible. Right. Once the dog has committed to the act, to the aggressive behavior. And I want you to talk a little bit about how to identify that. But this is not purely supplying negative consequence. Right. I mean, there is some positive aspect to it as well. Right. So once you've taught the dog the behavior not to engage in, when the dog doesn't engage in it, right, you're going to supply positive reinforcement at some point. Can you talk about that process?
I like to look at teaching a dog anything, especially with expectation. The analogy I use all the time is if you put 2 boxes in front of the dog, right? You can stick your nose into this box and there's always going to be a mousetrap in that box, right? The other box, you stick your nose in there, there's always going to be a honey pot in that box. By giving these dogs black and white choices, A or B choices, you can teach what we might perceive as a very complicated idea to control this drive. So when you say, is there a little bit of praise? Ideally, there's a lot of praise. This choice, what you all talked about in the last podcast, this idea of values. To a dog with dog-on-dog aggression, protecting his home, eliminating competition is one of the highest value things this dog has in his brain. Being at ease and hanging out with the owner doesn't have a lot of value to it.
Even with food as an enhancer.
That's this idea of nothing but positive. I always argue, well, show me that with a truly dog-aggressive dog, right? Show me this dog wanting to tear into another dog and you offer him a treat and he turns away and he takes the treat. It's just not a very realistic approach. So each time you apply this correction, you're diminishing this value of the aggression. I'm not mad at the dog for having this tendency. When you mention yelling at your dog, I cannot tell you how many times a day, throughout the day, I say it does nothing, right? It's like if somebody came in here and started screaming at me in Mandarin, that doesn't help me understand what I did wrong. I might stop the behavior for a second, but there's no actual learning moment. Usually, if a dog does listen to yelling, which they rarely do, it is out of confusion or is out of fear. It is not out of understanding. So the next time the dog is in that situation, he doesn't know that he did anything wrong. He's going to make the same decision. And if you're not there to yell, then he's going to launch into action. This idea of a physical, non-emotional consequence to his decision is shown him, look, every time you put your nose in box A, there's going to be that mousetrap. The mousetrap is not mad at you. No matter how much we butt heads, I'm not mad at you. But that is going to happen every time you commit towards aggression. Commitment has different looks, different faces, you might say. Some dogs, an intense stare is always going to send them over the edge. So you might correct that very intense stare. Other dogs, you can allow a passive look at the dog. And if you start to see the effort away, you reward that decision. They're very small, micro decisions that you are praising and that you are correcting. And that's what, experience will give you, is seeing these little decisions being made and applying a timely and really a convincing consequence, whether it's negative or positive.
Yeah, that's a very big point, and you alluded to it, Alex. This concept of recognition of where the behavior is going as early as possible. This behavior, I like. He's starting to move down that path early on. I need to be decisive, meaningful with reward. So we reinforce that behavior. That means the likelihood of it repeating is there. We're building that. Same side or same issue, different side of the coin. I see the dog's behaviors now starting to drift down the wrong path. A hard stare, a lip curl, a low grumble, way before there's contact, way before there's an explosive display of aggression. I see my dog is committed to the wrong path. I need a timely, here's a key word, decisive bit of action. And we use mousetrap as a mechanical metaphor so everybody can get their minds around it. Yeah. Mouse traps, if you put your finger in it, is not injurious to the human finger. It definitely feels bad, but there's nothing broken. It's not emotional. How many times, if I set a mouse trap up, are you going to stick your finger in it voluntarily? You said once, maybe twice if I'm really dull with it.
No, it depends on what bait you're using. Right?
That's true. That's right. Exactly. Exactly. Eventually, you're going to say, it's not worth it to stick my finger in that trap, and I'm going to look for other options. We make sure with every dog, every training scenario, there's always visible, obvious options for you, a negative option and a positive option. And in the beginning of training, when we talked about this concept of teaching before reinforcing, and the teaching step of dog training, whether it's the fundamentals or more advanced training, we don't allow the dog the negative option. We take him to the positive option over and over and over and over. So we say there is some positive consequences to dog training, right? It's 90% positive. If our negative consequences are timely and decisive, we don't need many of them. And that's one of the reasons why we found many years ago, we don't need to display an ugly emotional face from the handler side. I don't need to make this scary for you, dog. I don't need for you to think our relationship is unstable, because it's not. We're going to have a good time, and you're going to learn the proper behavior that benefits you the most.
I love that point. And Grant, I think you mentioned that if somebody yells at you or you see somebody yell at the dog, it's not going to do anything. And that's, I think, the best possible outcome, right? It is that it has no effect, right? The bad effect is that you're going to ruin the relationship with your dog, right? Because the dog gets anxious, the dog senses that you're angry, that there's something wrong, that you're unstable, just like you were saying, Matthew. So this goes back to the 10 natural steps that you have to be. The handler needs to be calm, right? They need to be consistent. They need to be genuine. There's no emotion does not have a place, especially in dog training, especially when you're delivering a correction.
Right. We say this. Negative emotion has no constructive, productive place in dog training. Flip side of the coin, positive emotion. Oh, wow. We can make things happen much more consistently, and we can make it happen much faster in the training process if we interject positive emotion come from the team captain. So this way the dog feels stimulated or titillated by the handling. At the same time, he feels safe because we don't display aggressive behavior towards our dog. We don't display negative emotional, and you think of it, it's a stress to the dog. We can teach in a motivated fashion, supply mechanical correction so he learns in a safe, calm mental environment. And that's what we found is absolutely the most productive, constructive way to go about dog training.
Yeah. And these are principles that apply to no matter what the type of aggression that we're addressing, right? Whether it's dog against dog aggression or predatory aggression or defensive aggression, which we'll get into here shortly. These are things that the handler needs to bear in mind when they're handling their dog. And I think that's what we talk about the books here as coaches at home, but that's one thing that you can't really get out of the books that you can get from in-person training is that you, as the trainers there at the facility, are sort of models for the owner at home. So seeing that tango dance happen is the best instruction that an owner can get. So I think seeing this aggressive behavior being managed in the facility is invaluable for the owner when they go back home with their dog.
Absolutely. And again, I think the tango analogy is appropriate in most discussions about dog training, meaning you can buy a book on tango dancing and learn how to tango dance in theory from the book. Wow, it's challenging. Far better to go have one-on-one instruction so the tango instructor can actually dance with you, can show you the rhythms and placement of the feet. Now, here's what you read in the book, and here's what's really meant by that, between the lines. And that's what Grant and I spend our entire day, year after year doing. We put into practice what you read here in theory. And again, we do say these books are your in-home coach. Remind you of terminology, remind you of black and white rules. So these books enhance what we do in person. They don't take the place of what we do in person, though.
I want to look at it as you have a textbook that you go home and read, and then you come in and sit down with your teacher and actually apply it. And for them to see it working, because again, to read and apply and say this doesn't work is something. How often do you hear, well, he doesn't do that for me at the house, right?
Oh, no.
And why does it do it for you? And I was like, well, there's a common denominator, and it's not me and it's not the dog. It's either a lack of follow through, which our clients are really good at follow through, or just a lack of the understanding why we're doing the things that we are doing. And back to the yelling at a dog, I've yet to see anybody effectively recall their dog with anger. I've yet to see a dog actually get down when they're yelled to get down. And if they do get down, they jump again the next time somebody comes in. So beating the point up of there's no place for negative emotion in dog training. And I like to ask people, when the last time you got yelled at, no matter who it was by, were you in a productive mindset after that? Were you in a problem-solving mindset, or did you immediately get defensive? Did you immediately get scared and your brain turns into this flustered mess that isn't able to break things down into A or B decisions?
Yeah. And one thing I mentioned earlier in the podcast that I love about the book is the examples, the stories of real dogs that, and their owners that are in the book. And at one point, I can't remember which dog it was, but you talk about the importance of consistency, which is right the point that you're getting at here, Grant. That the common denominator here is that there aren't consistent expectations at home. I think is primarily the issue that you're driving at here, and that with aggression management, especially with aggression management, I think it's true with the manners and with the formal commands as well. But consistency and building on small wins and utilizing that momentum to help you get to the place you want to be is incredibly important. And you can actually make change in the most aggressive dogs very quickly if you utilize that momentum. Because this is something that I think is applicable with respect to all the forms of aggressive behavior. Would you mind to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and I think one more aspect to this equation, one component can't be stressed enough: duration of application. because, it's the human tendency. It always has been, but especially in 2023. I need it now. I want change now. I'm willing to pay for it, but I want it now. Well, unfortunately, I don't care how badly you want to tango dance for a competition, you're not getting that done in a week. It's going to take months of relationship development, relationship building. And I would say that probably, that is as important a breakdown in our clients' training process as anything.
Oh, yeah.
The impatience. I said, well, my dog still doesn't come when I call him. We've only been working on it for 2 weeks. Let's give it a few months of practical, consistent application. Then you'll get your recall you're looking for.
Yeah, there's a line in the book, and I love this line because we talk some about the anthropomorphizing of dogs, and I think that this quote from the book is applicable to children, not just dogs. But it says, if a confident canine student detects his primary handler acquiescing under pressure or witnesses the handler's obvious avoidance of conflict over policy, then the stage has been set for a challenge over team leadership. And I think that's a very poignant point. I love that quote because that's why I think consistency is so important, because you're actually giving up your position as team leader if you don't take the lead.
Especially if we're talking about this category of dogs who are above average in confidence and assertiveness to start with. If you have a very meek or benign dog and you show this weakness in leadership, well, he might want to step up and take leadership himself. Have one of these dogs? Oh, for sure. He's going to say, step aside. I will be the captain because our group needs a leader to be effective. We need a leader to function. And if you're not up for the task, I am. And then again, you can see where we run into snafus when we have a very mild human leader and a very confident, intense working dog. Wow. This mild human handler is going to have to work out of their comfort zone to portray the image of strong leader. And remember what I said? I'm sure that we mentioned one of the podcasts. Canis familiaris as an animal is an expert at detecting a liar. So when you say, hey, I'm a confident leader, he says, liar, liar, pants on fire. I feel you in your boots now. So I don't hate you, but I'm going to knock you out of the way so I can take care of that delivery man. Even though you don't want me to, you're screaming, leave him alone, don't do that. No, bad dog. He said, got out, heard it, get out of my way. I got to take care of business, and then I'll come back and lick you up and we'll go have lunch somewhere. That is the dog's mindset. It's not about hate. It's not about, really, in most cases, with social aggression is punking out their handler. No, that's not the case either.
Spitefulness.
No, that's right. That's taken the dog's motives into that anthropomorphized deep state that they typically do not go to. But for the dog to say, get out of the way, milquetoast, let me take care of business, I'll come back and we'll hang out again. That's really the challenge here when you have strong personalities, especially, and you have a handler not demonstrating even if it has to be pseudo at first, you have the old saying, fake it till you make it. You've got to demonstrate confidence, decisiveness, consistent plan. I've got all that, dog, because I'm the team captain. Once, through this book, you've proven that to the dog over and over and over and over and over, guess what? He doesn't need to test you anymore. He said, I believe you. You are the captain. I'll defer to you. So when we get to more challenging aspects of dog training, he said, I don't really need to challenge you here either, do I? You are the leader. Let me defer to you naturally. Therefore, my world feels in order.
One thing, and I think it's a good time here to get into the next face of aggression, the predatory aggression. And one of the stories in the book is about a dog that was with a family, and I think the dog killed maybe it was a chicken, I can't recall, and a cat. And they decided, man, this is just we can't handle this. And the dog, I think, Matthew, maybe you took the dog home with you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I could be getting the dogs mixed up because there's a number of stories. But you can make progress with a dog that has this intense predatory aggression within a matter of days, and almost proof the dog in a matter of weeks if you're consistent with setting up the scenarios and teaching the dog what choices they have and what choice is the appropriate choice to make. So correct me if I'm wrong about the story there, but I think it's a good time. Let's talk about predatory aggression, what that is, how it manifests, and how quickly people can expect to make progress. And I know it varies dog to dog, but if they're consistent with these principles, how quickly people can expect to make progress with their dog.
Yeah, I'm going to let Grant run with that and just after a couple comments, but you're right. Here, as a client, you could see nearly immediate results in any number of these aggressive situations, in any phase of aggressive behavior, with us at the helm, with a structured environment, you will see immediate change. The cognitive error there for the owners to think, wow, it's gone. No, what you see is a dog effectively deferring to a handler who has set himself up as a decisive, confident captain. And as soon as you do that, the dog says, now I'm willing to pay attention. And if he's willing to pay attention over a number of days, weeks, and months, he said, I don't need to be reschooled in this area. I got that. You've proven your point. So, yes, we can take a dog home with us. Grant has done that on many occasions, and establish new rules for the new relationship in a day, in a week, in a month, for sure. But we have to caution our owners that don't think that issue, underlying issue, is gone. And don't think, client, that you can go home and duplicate what this man has done after 8 years professional training. You're not going to be able to go home and duplicate that in an afternoon or a week. No differently. Let's go back to tango dancing. Watching a tango instructor dance with my partner, thinking, wow, what a team. Look at my partner dance. I didn't know she was that good. Tango instructor says, Matt, now you come up. You dance with her. Oh, you're going to see that clumsy version of what I just saw. And I say, what's wrong? She could dance so well. The dance instructor says, but dude, you're not leading the dance appropriately. You couldn't expect to lead the dance appropriately. He said, I've been doing this professionally for 10 years. You've never tango danced. Give yourself time, months, weeks into months, not days into weeks. Yeah.
So, Grant, I think maybe now's a good time. Let's talk a little bit about predatory aggression. How does that manifest? How do you identify that? And what do you do about it?
Well, first understand it is next to dog on dog aggression is probably one of the most popular we deal with. And it's not a bad thing at all. It's actually what a lot of people want to develop in their dog, but they don't understand that the aggressive side comes through play a lot of the time. Chasing a ball is predatory drive. Squeaky toys are predatory drive. This concept of, don't show a dog you're fearful is a lot easier said than done for a lot of people. But it's this natural instinct that if I bulk up on you and you kind of back away, something clicks in the dog. It's a visceral reaction that now I'm supposed to chase you. Now I'm supposed to hunt you, possess you, own you, tear you up, all these different things. But again, it's not the aggression that people identified as, right? This is one people might say is protective again. The kid took off running, so he saw it as a threat. Typically, it's without thought they chase these things. The same way some dogs, my dog at 3 months old, I threw a ball and he naturally chased it. He had never seen a ball in his life, but once he saw that bouncing resemblance of a squirrel going down the room, he chases it without thought. So to address that is to control the environment more often than not, because I think you all talked about in the last podcast of self-rewarding behaviors, right? Once a dog has chased down a rabbit, has experienced the hunt, the capture, the kill, the possession of that, it is difficult to show them that's not all that valuable, because now they're in the most primitive state of mind they've been in, And adrenaline starts.
And they've just proved it to themselves.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's pretty rewarding, you ask me. And in the dog world, movement stimulates.
Yeah.
Movement stimulates a natural trigger instinct. Makes sense. If it moves, charge, grab it, because that's maybe your next meal.
Well, and this idea of smelling fear, I don't know where the concept started, but they don't smell you releasing pheromone that smells like fear. They are master of reading body language, like you mentioned earlier. Detecting a liar is rarely what somebody is saying, especially human on human. Detecting a liar is these micro body movements, these micro body language that you portray. So the smelling fear is not what it is. It's when that dog tilted his head and you pulled your hand back, he noticed that. And again, he wants to see how far he can push that. The dogs in these books, the dogs that we have both owned our whole lives, thrive on that. They've been bred for hundreds and hundreds of years to look for that, especially in the realm of Belgian Malinois, Dutch Shepherds, German Shepherds. They are bred for that purpose of sensing out prey and snuffing them out the best that they can. And addressing it is very similar. The way you're going to address most of these things is put them in a controlled environment with this prey-like object, whether that be the little Yorkie we got out back or
a control truck with a skin on top of it. We build prey.
Yes, and I think you talked about, was it a jump dog maybe, that had a real squirrel issue, and we have a bunch of walnut trees out back. That is prime time to work on this predatory drive, but it's again not something you want to quash out. The same thing as protective aggression. I don't want to quash that. I want to teach them to control it. And turn it into a game of fetch. Make it a fun thing for the dog, so the dog doesn't fear being around squirrels. They don't feel as if they're going to mess up. You've just directed it into something that is much more beneficial to the team than it is to the individual.
That's a valuable point you brought up too, about creating unnecessary stress in the presence of prey. It's unnecessary, meaning I don't want my dog to be afraid every time he walks in our backyard and there's walnut trees and squirrels, because he's afraid the squirrels are going to come down the tree. He's going to behave inappropriately. He's going to get a correction. So next you know, the squirrel represents a stressor. The walnut tree, the area, represents a stressor because one domino knocks another out. What we want our dogs to be in any of these situations, especially talking about the predatory aggression category, we want our dogs to be confidently indifferent. Confidently indifferent. He said, yeah, I see the cat. There was a time where I would love to chase that cat, feel like, and get the sensation, the feeling of him into my mouth. But it's been proven to me, the thrill, the profit isn't there like it once was. But it's not stressful to me because we are getting along well, the team captain and me. We are having a good time around the prey. But like with all forms of this aggression management, we don't start with predatory targets at the dog's nose. We first begin with self-control, handler deference, specific command responses, so that we build this relationship. And then distance is the very important part. I may have gotten into some of those details in this book.
You do.
Distance is important with the predatory management. Also, dog-on-dog management. Don't start with the target within reach, because that to the dog is, for as far as he's concerned, a very doable reward. At a distance, gradually work dog and target, predatory target together till finally that confident indifference applies even with predatory targets within proximity of the dog that's in training.
Yeah, I like that. I like that point a lot, and you do make that point in the book that the importance of a long line to sort of progress toward that distance to eventually being off leash completely. And this indifference, I think, is an important point too, because, and this goes back to the dog against dog aggression as well. Not only do we want the dog that's has that predatory aggression to be indifferent toward the squirrel, we want the dog that has the dog against dog aggression to be indifferent toward other dogs. They don't have to be friends with other dogs. We just don't want them to have that aggressive behavior.
Exactly. Because where do we go in this modern world out in the public where there are not other dogs?
Or squirrels, or cats, or
Right.
rabbits.
Or running toddlers. These attractions, these targets are everywhere. And if I want my companion, my canine companion, to be able to go with me out in public, you need to be able to handle these things, man. And so even though it is a real challenge, it's a real burden for a dog to carry this self-control, we pay our family dogs back in spades. You know, we actually, we can't explain this, but if you follow my rules, dog, you get to live better than most of the world's population of human beings when you factor in all the third world countries. My dog sleeps in climate control. He gets calories every day. He's free of worms. He's up on his inoculations. And I take him in all these public places because he has followed the rules I set for him. And that concept of confident indifference all day long, every day when we're out in public.
Yep. So whether that's the dog that wants to chase the squirrel or chase the person on the bicycle, wants to chase the moving object in the real world, it's about identifying that commitment toward that object, whatever it is, delivering the correction in an unemotional way. And when the dog doesn't commit to that aggression, delivering the positive praise and affection, right?
Enforce that behavior we want to keep, and we supply the negative consequence, punishment, to extinguish behavior we don't want to keep. And the dog, the cool thing about our training approach, the dog gets to choose. You choose. Right. We're a team. I like either way you go. Do you want the negative or do you want the positive? And like we always kid, the dogs, being smarter than turtles, say, why would I want the negative? I don't know. I was just curious. Because they're both there for you. You pick. We supply.
Yep. You present the options, they choose. And the other point, too, that I love this, especially with the predatory drive, this concept of replacement. So you're not trying to quash that drive, but part of the choice that they're making, right, is I don't have to chase the squirrel because I know my owner recognizes my drive and he's going to let me chase a ball sometime today or pull on a tug or.
Very good point. Again, Alex, I'll say it to your audience. You're cut above when it comes to intelligence and reading comprehension. You pick out things from the material that are actually between the lines. That is a critical concept in this training success. Leave the rabbit alone. Look, I've got a flying disc for you. Don't bother the squirrel or the little human being on a trike. I've got a wubba for you to chase, and we'll develop a game of catch, hunt, seek, find, grab. We'll do all the things you would have done naturally with our acceptable artificial prey.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So we've covered dog against dog aggression. And of course, we're not getting into the nitty gritty here. We could take days talking about each of these things and the nuance. But I want to finish before we close up the show for this part with defensive aggression. Would one of you mind to talk about what that is, how it manifests before we close up the show here?
Well, what you run with it, and probably a big point to make, it's stimulating, not necessarily fear, that puts a dog in a defensive thing. But again, there's some dogs are insecure.
Well, it's something we could, like you said, nitpick into a million different categories, but defensive, again, comes back to this natural ability to protect the pack. And it could come from fear. It could just come from straight confidence that he is wanting to defend his territory, he's wanting to defend his food, whatever the case might be. It is not unnatural for a dog to want to do that. The same way when we feel strongly about something, we want to defend that point, right? We feel as if it's something is deserving to defend. And it's this capacity of aggression, I think, is something we should talk about. It is almost in every single dog out there. It is not, certain dogs are bad because they're defensive or certain dogs are good because they've never shown aggression. I believe most people have the capacity of aggression if push came to shove. But it's important to be able to identify what these triggers are with the defensiveness. Same as it's a little more straightforward with dog on dog. It's a little more straightforward with predatory. Defensiveness could be broken down into these subcategories. But it's addressed the same way. You find what that trigger is. You put this dog in a benign situation at a distance from this stimulation, and you teach them how to handle it, teach them what is okay and what is not, and then you quickly close that gap in. Quickly building on what you mentioned earlier, small successes will lead to the large success you're looking for. But comparing to kids, if my kid is having a hard time understanding 2 + 2 = 4, I'm not jumping to long division. The same way, if my dog is defensive about people getting close to him, I'm not going to have a bunch of people run up on us and then expect him to be able to learn in that situation. If you're able to break it down, if you're able to isolate the actual trigger, defensive aggression is something that can easily be managed, but it comes down to the consistency, right? It's us as trainers, we have this advantage. When we first meet a dog and we start working on these aggressions, this dog has no experience with us. He's never met us. He does not know what we expect. So we already get a dog in a different mindset. He is adjusting as he goes on the fly with this stuff. Whereas with mom and dad, with the family, he has a set relationship. He has learned this, whether it's on purpose or not, that he's able to get away with this. So I make squash a lot of different aggressions, not just defensive aggression, very quickly because this dog doesn't know me.
And you have to think of it in this terms too, Alex, that the dog is in question when he meets Grant. What's up? That's what's going on in his mind.
Yeah.
Who are you? What's up? How are we going to relate? Grant said, I'm glad you asked those questions. Let me show you. I don't do this. I don't like that. And I do love this. And I'm going to reward you for that. With his family, and again, we have to talk about in defense of family members that are not specialists or educated in behavior shaping, canine behavior shaping. The dog says, I've already figured out what you expect and what you're prepared to do. So I know the rules with you. I don't ask you anymore. Meet somebody new? Well, what are our relationship rules? Let me show you. If I show you effectively, he said, got that. You're different than they are. So when I'm with you, I've got a set of rules. When I go back home, I get back to the familiar rules with my family.
Yeah, and a common manifestation of this is, I think, portrayed by the example of the Lhasa dog in the book, right? That when as soon as a stranger walks into the home, the dog, it starts growling, it starts barking, it exhibits this defensive aggression whenever a stranger walks into the home. And I think this is probably a typical form of aggression that lots of people see. And again, kind of like the point we made with the dog against dog aggression, the goal is not to make that Lhasa, that dog that's defensively aggressive, friends with strangers, right? Because you see a lot of people that they have a defensive dog and they immediately want to give the stranger a treat and ask the stranger to walk right up to the dog and feed it to try to make friends with it. Right? What's wrong with that?
You're putting the dog in the exact situation he doesn't want to be in. This dog is showing signs. I do not want to be friends with this person that just walks in the door. I do not want a treat from this person. Because this dog truly sees this person as a monster. And it's I don't put a lot of faith into my dogs, meaning if they growl at somebody knocking on my door, I don't say this is probably a terrible person. But in this dog's eyes, he has on these, he talks about in the book, these goggles, right? The story, I think it was an autistic girl that was finally able to find a way to communicate with her parents, and her dad finally was able to ask her, why can you not stare at me? And she said, when I stare at you, I see a monster with 1,000 eyes. I love you, and I've never doubted that you love me, but I cannot look at you because I see this monster. So putting that into the example you just listed, a dog is already in this defensive mindset. He's in fight or flight mode, and now this 1,000-eyed monster is now coming up to him trying to offer him food. I don't think any of us would take food from a monster. More often than not, we're gonna lash out, and the dog has already given every example of warning. He's growling. He's probably hackled. He's probably backing up into a corner. This idea of, oh, dogs love me. We see a lot of that. Well, it's okay. Dogs love me. He'll get over it. You're allowing the dog to act on what he's already doing. This whole let the dog smell your hand, we teach don't do that. It's a great way to lose a couple of fingers. It is more of almost confident indifference on our part of walking in and not trying to make it a point to be best friends with this dog that has no intentions of being friends with us.
Exactly. And to say that you need to hold your hand down to the dog's nose for him to smell you is an insult to the dog's olfactory system. When you walk into the house, he said, whoa, I got the full story of what you're about from your odor. I don't need to have your hand stuck in my face to smell you. And really, the concept here is we have an opportunity, a benign moment, so that I can be in your proximity. You can see I'm safe. So now maybe I can pet or offer you some food. And the dog says, like Grant mentioned, it's not so much about trust as much as I don't like.
Well,
I don't like you.
I don't want your
Right.
food.
So, safe or not, get your hand out of my face and offer food. Okay, how about I bark at you, drop the food, and I'll eat it then? Yeah, let's repeat that, says the dog, because that way I'm getting two benefits. I'm backing you off and I'm getting food. So think of the terms of defensive as, again, in many cases, titillating, self-rewarding, energizing. So it sometimes is just plain fun for a dog to, oh, and the person step back and the person scream. Yeah, it's rewarding in itself. But if a dog, defensive dog, has a stranger approach and lets out a little guttural growl, and that person steps back one step, already rewarded that dog. Dog said, don't get any closer, I don't think I like you. And when he growls and you step back, you've rewarded him, paid him for the growl. So reinforce that behavior, you'll get more of it. Offering food. Okay, how about this? All right, dog, look, I'm your Uncle Bobby. I don't mean harm. Here's a piece of bacon. Eat the bacon. Maybe even eat the bacon and growl at Bobby again. Bobby says, why is he still growling at me? Well, you're actually feeding him more. You're paying him to do that. First,
Yeah.
rid of the growl, then we can offer some bonus, some food, but definitely not necessary to come from Bobby. I want my dog, when he's confronted with a visitor that he is not kosher with, I want his reaction to be a canine yawn. I really don't like him, but you know, he's benign. He doesn't bother me. My team captain keeps him from touching me. My team captain keeps his disgusting hand out of my face. So he's not a worry for me. Team captain controls that. Now think of it, the reverse of that, flip side of the coin. Team captain says, disgusting Uncle Bobby, my dog doesn't like you, so stick your hand in his face. Pet on him. Hug him. The dog said, that's exactly what I was afraid you were going to do. So I had to take action myself. And that's where it comes from. It's not about good or bad. It's not about, truthfully, fear or hate. Let's think of it as disgust. I don't like. Let's handle it this way. I'll not let the disgust touch you. I won't allow you to touch the disgust. And we all live happily ever after in the living room, even while we share conversation. That is the confident indifference we're going after. A lot of moving parts there, and Grant will testify this. As an instructor, he's got to control the dog, the handler, the guest, all the moving parts, and convince everybody while he's instructed, stay the course, listen, keep it up, slacken your leash, no commands. Bobby, back up a little bit, please. It's too close now. Don't offer your hand, Bobby. Now, Mama, don't forget, you can't let him pull on the leash. That's a training session for us. It's exhausting. And Grant will tell you after a day of human dog instruction, we're emotionally whipped. It is a lot of energy we're having to expel, dump on our guests while we control all that energy. So it takes a unique human being to say, I want to do that for life. Grant, when he first came on, Grant, you're much too smart to be a dog trainer. This is hard, exhausting, and it's a career of passion. You're not going to be a millionaire. He said, I'm drawn to it. He proved it. Well, I guess you are a dog trainer. Because it takes that certain personality that says, I get a charge out of managing all this energy. I get a charge out of shaping dog behavior for the positive.
Well, I love it, and I think it's wonderful work. I mean, that's partly why I'm having you both on the podcast, right? Because the goal of this podcast and partly the goal of your books is to help people develop that positive relationship with their dog so that they can have one of the most fulfilling life experiences that anybody can have is a positive relationship, a positive lifelong relationship with their dog. And I think by just like the example here about defensive aggression, some of the common strategies that most people use are counterproductive and hurt that relationship with their dog. So by reading the book, by engaging in training with folks like you, I think people can change the tide and develop that positive relationship.
And this is what we to. We help our clients with their dogs develop freedom to be in public. The whole Forge of Freedom, you have a right to be with your dog out in public if
You can hear.
your dog behaves appropriately and is not a disruption. Is it any different, Alex? And we've talked about it and alluded to this example often, this comparison.
Firearms?
Yes, no different than having a firearm. If you want freedom to have your firearm, you have to abide by the rules. You have to be licensed. You have to know how to handle this weapon. And you can't be disruptive in public. If you follow the rules, if you're educated, you've got freedom with your gun out in public. You have freedom with your dog out in public. And that's really what we do with folks every day of the week, is help them gain this freedom to live with their dog as they feel is rewarding.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you can take personal responsibility to exercise your rights responsibly, then you can engage in the world freely. At least that's the goal, and that's true whether it's firearms or your canine friend. So, yeah, I think that in the first step to that, of course, in both endeavors is knowledge, right, and equipping yourself with the know-how and the skill to exercise those endeavors responsibly. So I think that's where we'll leave it for this episode. We've covered, and I'll give you both an opportunity to speak here in closing with any closing thoughts that you have. But obviously, we've talked, sort of hit on a lot of the points that we touched on in the podcast about the 10 natural steps, sort of reemphasize the importance of the fundamentals and building that positive relationship with your dog before you get into these more advanced corrective behavior, or to addressing these more specific aggressive behaviors, I would say, in the 8 phases of aggressive behavior. So next time when we come back, we'll talk about the remaining phases of aggressive behavior: territorial aggression, protest aggression, intolerance aggression, possessive aggression, and social aggression. So before we sign off here, Grant, Matthew, I want to give you an opportunity. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing before we wrap up here?
Don't look at aggression as a negative thing. I think it's a very beneficial thing in certain cases, whether that be you're willing to be the aggressor, saving your family's life, or your dog is willing to be the aggressor, getting that squirrel out of the tree for you. Aggression has been given a very negative light. When in control, I think it's a very, very useful thing. And just because your dog's aggressive does not make them a bad dog.
Very good thought. And just to cap that off, aggression management in dogs should be a positive, build a positive experience for the dog, just like developing or building manners in formal command response. This is not about the negative here. This is about more challenging behavior that we want to motivate a dog to manage. So still very upbeat way to approach training.
Yeah. All right. Well, Matthew, thanks again for coming along, and Grant, welcome to the show. I'm glad you were able to join us today. I enjoyed the discussion, and I hope our listeners did as well, and look forward to our next discussion. For those of you listening, if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like and subscribe to help us spread the message of freedom. And until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter @ForgeOfFreedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.